This is Sully Blanchard, one of the original Four Horsemen. You're listening to WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum.
All right, folks, we are back. Welcome back to Wrestling's Glory Days on Facebook's weekly podcast, WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. My name is Steve, and with me is the Scum. It's an excellent week to be a classic wrestling fan and to subscribe to our channel, because we got one hell of a guest for you this week. The Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, Scum. What do you think, man?
I know you're pretty excited, my friend, just like I am. One of the greatest minds, one of the most evil minds in professional wrestling history, Kevin Sullivan. Can't wait to get into some of these stories with him about his classic feud with the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and Chris Benoit, and some of those great matches. Before we go any further, I always like to say, give you a little call out here. It's always a pleasure to be working alongside you, Steve, my longtime tag team partner. Always a pleasure to be doing business with the boys over on Facebook at Wrestling's Glory Days. And today, be a pleasure to strap a boa around our neck, paint our face with a cross on our forehead, and roll our eyes back in our head with Kevin Sullivan.
You know, you're absolutely right, Scum, and I'm going to have to correct you on one thing. I generally go to work looking like that every day.
Oh, I knew that. I did nothing out of the norm for you. I've known you for years. I know you walk in, you show up, no shirt, trunks, boots, and half black, half white face paint on. Been that way for years. That's absolutely right. Absolutely. Yeah, every job I go to, and my password is always Huss. Yeah, with like a very scantily dressed valet.
Yes, with weird names like Dark Journey or Purple Passion.
Yes, with Purple Passion, with strange looking heavy eye makeup on.
That's right, man. And you know, that's crazy that Kevin Sullivan, he gets the notoriety from that gimmick, but man, this guy's been all over the world. And like you said, you've said this a couple of times, and it can't be said enough that his ability to tell a story through wrestling, to book good wrestling angles, is, you know, it may not be his claim to fame, but I think he may be just as skilled at that as he was in the ring.
Absolutely. Ever since we had the chance to originally meet Kevin down at WrestleCade in Winston-Salem, the end of November, just in the brief video clip that aired during our Lost Tapes WrestleCade episode with Justin Credible, when he started talking, immediately my thought process was, I cannot wait to get this guy on the show. Because in those few minutes, he was interesting, and you could tell what an intelligent and well-spoken man that he was. And but you know, before we get into the interview here, Steve, I'd like to give a call out, some thanks to a gentleman who works along with Kevin that was instrumental in getting him on the program. That's Chris Hughes. Thanks to Chris, if he's listening in, for getting Kevin on the program for us, making it very easy, quick, and painless for Steve and the Scum to have one of the all-time great minds in wrestling to join us on WGD Weekly.
Yeah, man. Now, I got a couple of questions here. I have one question anyway. Is that Mr. Hughes to me, or are we on a first-name basis?
No, not Curtis Hughes. That's Chris Hughes. And it's also not his uncle, Jerry Hughes.
Oh, boy. Well, I'll tell you, Scum, I wanted to throw a shout-out as well this week. We got a couple of new admins to join the team. We got Jimmy Mad Depth Wheeler. I think he's English. I'm not sure where he's from in the world. I think he's from jolly old England. So welcome aboard to him. And we got another guy who seems to really like our page and has joined the admin team as well, Michael. So welcome aboard, boys. Hope you enjoy it. Kevin Sullivan, I think we're just going to go right to the interview, because quite frankly, it's like 90 minutes long. Our listeners deserve a great interview, and we wanted to thank them for listening. And quite frankly, we can go almost unadulterated with this, but special surprise after the interview. So stay tuned. I got a couple of things we wanted to discuss along with talking about the interview itself. So, Scum, if there's anything you needed to add, we'll get right to it.
No, Steve, I can't wait to jump in with both feet. Looks like the WGD phone lines are lighting up, and it appears as though the caller ID reads hell. So let's get right to Kevin Sullivan.
Sounds good. We'll be back right after this.
This is Action Smash of Demolition with Steve and the Scum. Every week, WGD Weekly. We listen to it. You should too. You better, or we're going to kick your stinking teeth in.
Okay, everybody, we are back. Thanks once again for joining us at WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. This is the part of the show that everybody looks forward to every week, and that's where we have one of the great performers from the glory days of professional wrestling sit down with Steve and the Scum and answer a couple of questions. We're going to go over a timeline of his career, and this week, Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster. Legendary feuds with Chris Benoit, Dusty Rhodes, all over the territories. Huge baseball fan, a great wrestling mind as well as a great wrestling talent. One of the most sadistic guys of all time. That's why me and the Scum love him so much. So, Kevin, thanks a lot for joining us. I wanted to get your opinion right away about how individuals in today's environment break into the business as opposed to when you did. There's a lot of different theories on whether or not today's performers pay their dues. So I wanted to hear what your opinion was on that.
Okay. First of all, I want to say this right off the bat. I don't want to sound like an old, grumpy crab like most of the guys do. The guys are pathetic. I was better in my day. It's like, ball players who, different eras. You can't compare. The kids today probably are much better athletes, probably a lot smarter, better educated. But the difference is, I hate the word mark. I think the guys that became wrestlers in my generations were wrestling fans. Okay, I knew that wrestling was fake, or choreographed, or whatever you want to call it, because it's not fake. It was controlled. When I was 10 years old, I saw a Superman episode with the original George Reeves, where they had captured this Indian from India wrestler that was shooting, and the promoter put him in a cage, and Superman busts it down, and the guy goes and wins the title. And at the end of that series, the promoter yells, real wrestling, I love it, okay? I knew then. But I had wrestled amateur, and I just was a wrestling fan. And Killer Kowalski was the mainstay in Boston at the time. And then after that, we had a period where professional wrestling was not on the TV in New England. And then Vince Sr. came in, and Bruno was there, and all these people. So I started to go back a little. First match I went back was because Jim Nance, people don't remember this, he played for the Boston Patriots. He was a great fullback, but he had wrestled at Syracuse, and they used him as a special referee. In fact, he was All-American college wrestler sophomore and senior year. He was never taken down in his career. So I went to see him because I was an amateur wrestler. And I knew it. I loved what the guys did. But then the Sheik came into town, the original Sheik. And when he came out, the building actually moved for me. There was a vibration there. And I turned around to my friend and I said, I don't give a shit if this is all fake. This guy's real. And I was hooked then. So I started wrestling, as I said, I was wrestling amateur, and I was working out at the YMCA Union, and a guy came in and said, do you want to work out? It's the second oldest athletic club in the United States next to the New York Athletic Club. So I started working out with the guy, and we were wrestling amateur, and he wasn't a big guy. He's only about 165, 170 pounds. He had graduated from Oxford and Harvard Business School. His family's name were the Berries. They were the second largest diamond mine owners in the world from South Africa at the time. And we got to be friends, and he said to me, did you ever think about becoming a professional wrestler? And I said, yeah, but it's impossible to get in, I think. I don't know how to go about it. He said, well, the thing is, I wrestled for some smaller groups in Canada, he said, because it's beneath my aristocratic class to wrestle professionally. He was from South Africa, so wrestling wasn't viewed as an upper crust job. You know what I'm saying? So I went up to Montreal at the very end of 1969 and wrestled a guy named Fernand Fichette. We wrestled in a small arena, but Fernand was a kind of a semi-star for the Montreal office, but they used to be able to work around in Montreal and other places if they had a day off. So I go in, I've been in the ring a couple of times, and I've gone through the holes with people, but now I get up there. So I'm in the dressing room, and my friend's there with me. He was on the first match, and I see the referee pulled him aside, and I figure they're going to pull me aside. So I keep on waiting. So the referee goes by, and I said, "Excuse me, can I talk to you for a second?" He said, "I'll be right back." One of the other referees went by, and I said, "Excuse me, can I talk to you for a second?" He said, "I'll be right back." So now I don't know the finish. The bell is ringing for us to go on. Nobody tells me anything and sends me out there. So I go out there, and like anybody else, I freeze. But I fly in mid Fernando over, and I stomped him in the head, and it was probably a bad kick. Well, he rolled out on the apron and was trying to clear his head. Well, I had seen guys pull guys over the top rope, slingshot them in. Yeah. But where my mind was, I don't know, because I hit the far ropes and probably came off at 30 miles an hour and knocked him back in the fourth row. And he looked up and said, "The hell with this," and walked back to the dressing room. And I came back. I said, "Uh-oh, something's going to happen." He came up to me and said, "Hey, what the hell happened out there?" I said, "Nobody told me anything." And he jumped all over the referee and said, "Hey, if this kid could get hurt, I could have got hurt. You guys are stupid." So my first match, I wasn't even smart, but when he was leaving, the funny thing was, because my friend would tell me years later about it, I jumped up in the top rope, and I was so nervous that he was leaving, thinking I'd never get another shot. I'm yelling, "Come back, come back." So that's how I started. But where are you going about these younger guys? The problem with the wrestling business today, and it isn't their fault, nobody knows the history of professional wrestling. Like, we were talking baseball earlier, and I can tell you guys are big baseball fans. Okay, I don't have to ask you who Ted Williams is. I don't have to say 56 games in a row in hitting streak, who is it? I don't have to ask you the guys that, because you know. These kids that are in there don't even know who Buddy Rogers, Lou Thez was. Never mind Danny McShane, who really innovated pro wrestling and brought in the high spots along with Buddy Rogers. What they're doing today, they wouldn't be doing, and the sad thing is they don't know who started this. You know what I'm saying? It's like Rivera. He throws that splitter. How many guys copied him? But if he didn't throw it, they wouldn't be successful. It wouldn't probably be thrown as much as it is. The problem is all these guys did this that are in the business now, don't know, that are getting in the business, don't know the history of the business, because I don't think a lot of them were fans. And when I first got in the business, it was much harder. It wasn't an open door. And they would try to run you out of the business. When I first went to Atlanta, that was my first real territory. That was in 1970. I got all the old-timers every night. It was 15, 20 minutes. And they taught me, but they didn't teach me without rubbing my face on the mat, stiff me up. I mean, one time Dr. Timothy Gohagan, I said to him, we're going to do a high spot. And he used the sleeper, and I said, "Is that real?" Well, he used to put people out during the match. He said, "I'll show you if it's real," when he put it on me for a high spot. I was out in a second, but he was good enough worker for about 30 seconds to go around me and kick off of me before I came to. It wasn't so easy back then. And I'm not saying it was real and anything that, but they tried to make sure who they were bringing in the business was going to stay and was going to respect the business and knew the history of it and respected the past.
It certainly does. Very well said. I just listening to what you were saying and drawing the analogies between the history of baseball and the history of wrestling, makes perfect sense. And yeah, that it was very well said. So to move on to your legendary career here, we would eventually see you develop into one of the most feared and believable villains of all time. We'll certainly be touching on that as we move forward here, but some of the newer fans and even some of the fans from that frequent our site, Wrestling's Glory Days, some of the older fans might not recall when you started out for several years that you had a stint as a fan favorite up in the WWF and a few other stops in the mid-'70s. So before we get on to that time and your legendary heel runs, could you walk us back through what it was like working for Vince McMahon Sr., maybe rehash some of the memories that you had, the performers back then that you worked with up in the Northeast?
Yeah, he was one of the great good guys in the history of the business. He was a class act. I actually learned the book watching him. He was a man of integrity, and people asked me this question in an interview just recently. Of all the champions you saw, who stuck out to you? Well, I don't know if this was a holdover for me being a fan, but when Bruno Sammartino walked down the aisle, he looked like the World Heavyweight Champion. I'm not, and this isn't diminishing any of the champions since, before or since, but Bruno just had a presence about him that he looked like the World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. Back in that time, if someone said to me, draw a guy who you think would be the World Heavyweight Champion, I would have drawn Bruno Sammartino. I mean, Sammartino and Koloff had matches. I'll tell you a story. They had a match in Madison Square Garden. It was a return match, after Koloff had beat him, I believe. Or it was somewhere leading up to that. And Koloff came in the ring with a chair. It was a wooden chair, and he threw it. And Bruno didn't even put up his hands, and it hit him and split him, his bridge of his nose and his forehead. Blood's running down. And I heard Vince Sr. give him a big compliment. He turned to somebody and said, "They're gladiators. They're the last of the gladiators." I mean, these guys, if this match wasn't as close to, watching MMA fight today, I mean, they were fabulous. And the performers back then, as time goes by, people forget that guys were very, very good. Like Bruno, I said that he carried the part. But Ivan Koloff was a working machine. He was terrific. Whether he was 300 pounds or down to 250, he was a great performer, and he never got the credit, I thought, that he deserved. There was some great talent back then. I mean, Kowalski was on his, last run there. To me, that was a guy that wrestled like a machine. I mean, there was Ken Patera, Bruiser Brody was there, Stan Hansen was there. I mean, legendary guys were there, so I got a chance to watch them. And their style for the Northeast was completely different than the rest of the country, and that's what the difference was of wrestling back then. Each area had a different style. And Vince had style was because he used ethnics. There was something for Bruno's for the Italians. Pat Barrett was for the Irish. Spiros Arion was for the Greeks. They even had, I can't remember the guy's name right off, but there was a guy for the Portuguese, which was big in Connecticut and parts of Massachusetts. They had French Canadians, Louis Cerdan. So he choreographed Puerto Ricans, Pedro and Victor Rivera. He had Indians, Jay Strombo. I mean, he covered the whole spectrum. He was smart enough to know that those were the last of the ethnic neighborhoods. I don't think there's many left in the country, but he got the last time out of them by giving them a hero that represented them. It was a pretty brilliant idea if you look at it. You know what I'm saying? So, I saw some Spiros Arion. There's another guy that people don't know. He was a great worker. One of the first big, well-built guys in the business before, and I was there when the first anti-hero ever appeared in wrestling, Superstar Billy Graham. He was the first heel that the people cheered. People forget that. Today they just take it for granted. You know, Austin, Undertaker, NWO. There wouldn't have been those anti-heroes if Billy hadn't broken the barrier. How are you going to boo Billy Graham back in those days when he looked like a, you know, he was Mr. America, and, you know, he was colorful and he could talk. He was the first great talker in the Northeast, you know. So there was a group of guys that Vince used the right way, and I got a chance to see and the pleasure of working with some of them, yeah. Up there and then later on in my career.
You know, Kevin, it's really great to hear you talk about Ivan Koloff with such good words. I really hope he gets in the Hall of Fame this year. You know, we were talking about characters and the ethnicity behind them and how the fans invested their time into the character that both best suited their ethnicity. Now, it's a much different story as you move further south down to Florida thereafter.
Right.
The wrestling product was much different. The fans were just as rabid, but it was certainly a different landscape. Now, developing your devil-worshipping character down there, something that I'm sure the fans were surprised to see in your programs with Dusty and Blackjack Mulligan, and my favorite, Bruiser Brody, were some really, really great programs. So talk to us a little bit about your move to Florida, how you developed the devil-worshipping gimmick for Kevin Sullivan, and were you surprised that the fans were so emotionally invested and you were so over in that territory with that type of a gimmick?
Well, it got over, first of all. I never mentioned the devil. I used to use a word, a Buddha being. And the thing is, I had traveled around the world, and I had gone to Singapore and Malaysia. So I'm a kind of a historian, and I love to read, and I love the geography. And I often thought it was funny guys who build themselves and never been from the city. So I learned some things. And the Buddha Dean was a Hindu fertility god. So I would talk to him. But before I got into that, I was a babyface in Florida who had come back and had divided the baby faces. The Mulligans were saying to Mike Graham and the Dusty, and this isn't the same guy you knew. And I would say, we had a run-in, I'll agree, I'll take the blame, but it wasn't just completely my fault, but I'll take the blame if that's what they want. So it split the baby faces in half, and it almost looked like the Mulligans were going to turn heel. You know, with Rotunda and all of that group. So it was really split in half. So I ended up wrestling Barry on TV for 58 minutes. And Mike Graham was the commentator alongside the legendary Gordon Soley. And Mike and I had been tag team champions there for like in 72 to 74. This is 81. So Mike and I had a history. Everybody knew Mike and I had been tag team champions and friends. And I'm wrestling Barry in about the 56th minute of the match. And now we're really moving. I mean, this is a super babyface match in my estimation. And working with Barry Windham, how could it not be back when he was, 210 pounds, most handsome guy in the wrestling business. And I go for a move, and I tumble out of the ring. Barry holds up the rope for me to get in, and I crawl in. We go around another 3 minutes, and the same thing happens, but it's reversed. Barry takes a bump out, I hold the rope up. Barry, as he steps through, I kick him right in the face. And I kicked him in the face. He put his hand up, but I got him pretty good. And I covered him 1, 2, 3. So I went down, and Mike had the belt, and I grabbed the belt, and Mike said, "Hey, you can't do that, Kevin. What's gone wrong with you?" And Mike and I had a strange relationship. We loved and hated each other at the same time. And I said, "Oh, I can't, huh?" And I hit Mike so hard with the belt, it was a shoot. He flipped over on the floor because I knew I had to get over. He flipped over and fell on the floor, and he was so pissed at me. He came around that desk like he was going to fight me, but he had popped all his buttons. Rather than a fly, he had buttons on his pants, and he had popped all his buttons when he fell, and when he was chasing me, his pants were going down to his knees. He just grabbed his knees, grabbing the pants underneath, he was swearing at me, he chased me back to the dressing room. I actually thought I was going to have to fight him, They calmed them down, but I started with that. Now I become the heel. So I say, now, how am I going to work with these tough guys? You know, they're all 6'6", 6'7". How am I going to talk to them? So I went out and cut a promo that there's no such thing as the American dream. What are you going to have, American dream? You got 3 kids, you're unemployed, they're knocking on your door for the car payment, kids are cranky, and I was a half-assed promo about how the world was. And you got to remember, we're at that time, we're just coming out of the Carter era where we were fuel lines, you know, we weren't feeling good about ourselves, you know, from the Ayatollah keeping people for, what was it, 380-something days, you know what I mean? America had just gotten their ass kicked in a way for the first time. So I jumped on that bandwagon, and when I did, it must hit home to Dusty because he was the booker and he walked straight past me when we were going through the dressing room. He went out and cut a promo that I was out of my mind, and blah, blah, blah. So then the next week I show up with, you got to remember, MTV's just starting now. Billy Idol, you know, horror movies, thriller, they're just coming out. I come out with a very, very hint of eyeshadow under my eyes. Look like I haven't been sleeping. Well, Scarface is out, right? So I'm indicating something to these people, that this guy is dabbling in the dark side and he's losing his mind. And I didn't start that gimmick from the letter S. I started it from A. And by the time that babyface had won the belt at A, when I took them to S, I had X shaved in my chest, an X on my forehead, paint in my face, bones around my neck, and I had worked singles with Andre, defeated Blackjack, defeated Dusty, blinded superstar Billy Graham, where he had to go in the desert and purge himself from me. It wasn't that. If I had started that gimmick from A, people would have farted at it. It was a slow build that every week they saw something going wrong. It was like watching somebody go insane. So by the time I got to S, they were hooked on it. And the other thing was, I never went anywhere without my robe on. I would walk into the gym I trained at sometimes without shoes and saying, I'm going shoeless for 30 days, who will follow me? I mean, it was a different era. It was half the boys in the dressing room thought I was insane. Because I would purposely, there was a few guys that came from the deep south, maybe not college educated, and I just kind of stare at them and it'd make them uncomfortable. So I knew that if the guys felt there was something wrong with me, they'd tell everybody. And believe it or not, back then, guys would tell friends, well, it's not really real. And they would probably say about me, well, wrestling isn't real, but that guy is crazy. I'm going to tell you that. He's crazy. So that's how it developed.
Very good. Real interesting stuff. And again, it speaks volumes, even assuming that was prior to, you doing anything creatively behind the scenes or anything, but you can tell, the great mind that you have for the business. And I know Steve agrees as well when I, would say, and some of our guests have also spoken of you in that nature, very respected mind in the business, the wrestling business. So we're going to move on, and the next step that we wanted to touch on was when, after Florida, you moved up and worked for Jim Crockett Promotions. You came in with the Varsity Club and Rotundo and Steiner. Now most of your run with that company, time-wise, looking back, assuming must have been under the watch of someone. A couple weeks back, we had one of those guys who spoke very highly of you. It was Jim Cornette. He touched on someone who was in charge of the promotion there. It had to be, at least during some of your run, and somewhat comedically, that was Jim Hurd. Now, given the fact of, obviously, from what you've already spoken on and your respected mind in the business, one of the great minds ever, Could you look back and paint a picture of that Crockett promotion, maybe when you first came in, and also what was going on there during the Herd era from both the point of a performer and creatively?
Okay, I'm sure when Jimmy Cornette talked about Herd, you had to calm him down and give him a tranquilizer.
Actually, he was pretty. He had a pretty good sense of humor about it. He told a funny story about. You may have been one of the names he mentioned that was there.
I was the guy. I know where you're going about the hunchbacks.
Yes, yeah. He talked about.
That was my idea. I was so stupid, right? He said they can't get pinned. Me and Jimmy are sitting at the table listening to this. We're horrified, right? This is Jim Herd, right? I'm looking at Jimmy. He's looking at me like, when are we supposed to laugh, right? These guys can't get pinned. They're the hunchbacks, right? And I'm looking at Jimmy, and he's looking at me. We're looking at each other. I look back at Jimmy. We look at each other at horror now because it's not funny. And I turned to Herd and said, that's the greatest idea I've ever heard. Let me tell you what we do. We build these guys up, and then we go to an outside stadium. We go to Atlanta Fulton Stadium, and we get our top baby faces to come out with a shovel, and they dig a hole and push their humps back, and we beat them outside. 1, 2, 3. Herd jumps up. That's it. The best idea I ever heard. Me and Jimmy went to take a piss together, and I'm banging my head against the wall laughing, and Jimmy turns to me and says, it ain't that funny. He'll do it. Oh, it was brutal. You guys appreciate this. Herd comes up to me and Jimmy one day and says, I want to make Ric Flair Spartacus. What do you think, right? He says, he needs something new to get him going. We'll cut his hair real short, put double earrings in his ears. I said, you think when the Yankees had Babe Ruth, they changed the number from 3 to fucking 45? He's Ric Flair. Sorry about that. He's Ric Flair. I mean, this guy was a Pizza Hut executive. The only reason why he got the job because he was the manager, TV manager in St. Louis back when the St. Louis TV was from the Kiel Auditorium and the hotel there. And that's how he got the job. Someone, when they bought the company, they said, does anybody know anything about wrestling? And someone said, yeah, I got a guy that knows about wrestling because he produced it. Well, he knew nothing. The ding-dongs. I mean, we were such an embarrassment. And some of the guys, I felt so bad for the dynamic dudes. You know, the ding-dongs. I went on and on and on. And the thing was, he was a bully, Jim Herd, and you had to bully him back. He hated Cornette because Cornette talked shit to him all the time. There's a couple other things that happened with me that I don't want to get into, but he just saw it as here he wanted to rip the business in half and throw away the history and throw away what came with it, because I think that he was one of the most insecure people I've ever met in the wrestling business. And he didn't want anybody around him that knew anything about the wrestling business. And he happened to come into an era when he came in, there was a lot of guys that weren't going to just say yes, that had respect and pride to be in the wrestling business. And Jimmy was one of them, you know, and it was just ridiculous. I mean, it was one of the few times in my life that I hated to go to work.
Putting the ding-dongs and the hunchbacks aside, there was another team led by Harley Race named the Kongs, a couple of masked, grossly overweight individuals. Was that the same time frame in WCW with Jim Herd?
That came a little later, but in that time frame, yeah, too. That was Herd, too. Again, they were grossly overweight. You know, and he said they're two big guys, and, you know, he would take somebody's idea. And like, okay, back in that time, if I had said, boy, I saw a great match with Terry Funk and Ric Flair, he would say, "Oh, let's put a horse head on Terry Funk so they know he's from Texas, and we'll give him a pitchfork, and he'll come out with a girl whistling with Dallas cowgirl boots and that kind of outfit, and we'll shave Flair's head so they know he's the bad guy." It was he just would go off, and I mean, the horrible thing was, I felt like the band on the Titanic. Everybody's jumping off, and I'm still playing the violin as the water's creeping up to my belly button, you know? And it's so cold, I'm leaking in my pants. That's how embarrassed I am.
All right, well, we'll move on from there. Enough of the pizza talk. Let's move on to a great territory that you worked in. One of the last bastions of territory wrestling, if you really think about it. Smoky Mountain Wrestling, one of my favorites. Great guys came through there. Some of the old, some of the new. Rock and Roll Express, yourself, Dutch Mantell, of course, Jim Cornette. And then you had new guys like Lance Storm, Chris Jericho. The Gangsters moved on to ECW. It was a crazy time frame as far as the history of wrestling goes, but it was a great territory. So take us through your time at Smoky Mountain Wrestling, what your thoughts were of it, and why was it so immensely popular? And in the end, why did it not have the legs to survive?
Okay. I was lucky that Jimmy would bring me in. I never worked there full time, but I'll be in there, probably a minimum of 6 to 8 days a month. Jimmy took care of me. He brought me in for the big shows. One of the best matches I ever had in my life was with Boss Man, the big Boss Man in Johnson City. He was one of the greatest workers of all times, and his time came too soon. Jimmy had the handle on it. Before he brought me in, he did a thing like Brian, the referee that died, Hildebrand. He before I came in, they were doing vignettes with Hildebrand, like he was Dracula's. You remember the guy that went crazy for Dracula? He was put in the jail. Not Ragnar. I'll think of it. But anyway, Brian did those interviews. The Master's coming. And most people figured out who it was, I think, but it was Jimmy knew how to build a story. So when I came in there, I was, I had worked in Knoxville a few years prior to that, quite a bit. So the people kind of knew. But his stuff, Jimmy booked like, if you know what you're doing, and Jimmy was a student of the wrestling business, Jimmy booked the card like it should be. The first match did some wrestling, some high spots, and it was like if you go to the circus, and it isn't just the elephants on parade all day. If you don't like the elephants on parade, hold on. The clowns are coming out of the car. If you don't like that, the acrobats are coming up next. If you don't like that, the tumblers are coming up next and it's going to swallow swords. And at the end of the show, Gunther Gabriel Williams is going to stick his head in the lion's throat. You know what I mean? And we're all hoping that the lion kicks his head off. So Jimmy knew how to book a card. I always say it's like a circus, but it's also like a song, crescendo and blow off. And his stuff, there's a thing where I spiked Kenny Mora. I don't know if you guys know about this one.
That was some bloody stuff. I've seen the footage of that on YouTube.
Yeah, let me tell you a story about that. I had worked with him in Japan prior to this, okay? And they were bringing that and taking the tape back to Japan. Okay, here's what we do in Japan. The angle is it's up to who's the most valuable wrestler for the company, right? And it's between me and him. And we're both standing out there. And he wins, and it's a plaque inside of a glass case, okay? So I'm in the dressing room, and I figure we're going to do something off this, but I don't know what. And he comes over to me with the boss and says, Sullivan son, how they shake their heads, eyes down. Yes. And I said, yes, Kenmore. He said, please take glass case after I win, and you throw it in my face. I said, Kenmore, you know who you're asking to do this? You're asking me. I said, I wouldn't even ask me to do that. I can't protect you. Oh, Sullivan's on, please, big high spot right there. Okay. So I throw the, and I'm saying to myself, how am I going to do this? So the guy says, the booker assistant, just throw it in his face as quickly as you can, and we'll shatter and won't even hurt him. Throwing glass on someone's face ain't going to harm him. So I go, okay, I'll trust you. I throw it, boom. Thank God he didn't really get hurt. But all of his body is like he went through a car window. From his forehead to his chest is slivers of glass, right? And I'm saying, oh, God. So now Jimmy books Kanemaru and me in a TV match to shoot an ankle for the Japanese and send them back. So he says, you take Spike Colason and you stab me, and I cut my arm. I said, well, I don't think you need to cut your arm. He said, no, I need to cut my arm. I said, okay, we'll do it. We get out there, and when he pulls the blade, it's a surgical blade with no tape on it. Well, I don't know if you guys know what a surgical blade is. It's from the surgeon that cuts you open, that you just touch it and your skin opens up. Well, his skin opened up like a vagina. I could look in and see the tendons and ligaments, okay? Blood squirting all over the place, but I can see the white tendons and ligaments. But it's opened up, like 2 inches. And I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to get over, so I stuck the spike in there. Arn Anderson happened to be working on TV that day for Jimmy. And he came over and said, whoa, in the interview, that's the grossest thing he's ever seen. But it was. But it gave the territory like a little bump, but I would never suggest anybody do that. That was, that was the Japanese hardcore stuff that they do. But Jimmy took that and kind of made it bigger than it was. I mean, it was horrible and it was big, but he put the X's on it and did it and made it bigger and got me over. And Jimmy also had Paul Orndorff in and out of there. He had Brian Lee. He had good talent. Jimmy had a great idea. The only reason why that didn't make it, he was being squeezed by, WCW and Vince. He's in the middle, right? They're coming into some of his towns. But if Jimmy had been able to get, and he was blocked by contracts with the other people. You couldn't have a wrestling event 30 days before or 30 days after. If Jimmy could have gotten Louisville, Chattanooga, Lexington, and maybe one other major town, Jimmy would still be running today. It was just, and I don't care what anybody wants to say, ECW is nothing but a mixture of Florida Championship Wrestling mixed with Smoky Mountain Wrestling, with hip guys and with audience participation. But Jimmy was the innovator, and this is taking nothing away from Paul E. because I started Paul E. I gave him the phone. I'm not taking anything away from Paul E. Paul E. did a magnificent job. But Jimmy was the first one that ran an independent like that I know of, that held his own for a while against 2 major companies.
Sure. Get no arguments here. I mean, all that old Smoky Mountain stuff still certainly stands the test of time watching it today. I mean,
yes,
it's great stuff. Well, given some of the great stories you've already laid on us, I'm really looking forward to this next part. When we get about halfway through our interviews, we do a thing that I like to call the 3 R's. So kind of gets usually a little bit of a lighthearted take on here, and we look for a story out of the different performers we talk to. The 3 R's, they stand for what we ask for here out of you is either a road story, a rib, or a riot scene. So any of the 3 that you'd like to pick, something, from your many years in the business, one of those 3 that you'd like to pick and lay on us, we're just going to sit back and enjoy it, because obviously you're a great storyteller with a great history in the business. So,
okay, I'll give you one. Ricky Martel was one of the greatest baby faces of all times. I went to Calgary for about 2 months. I saw Ricky there, and I said, I'll get you booked in the States. I'm sure he heard that from everybody, but I did get him booked in the United States first. And many years later, he came up to me and thanked me. I mean, blew me away. Probably 25 years later, he said, "Kevin, thank you very much for what you did for me." And I've always thought Ricky's a class guy. And Ricky was always kind of a low-key, dressed, immaculate. You know, the model was him. When he was up to WWF at the time, that was perfect for him because he dresses, you know, he's smart. I mean, he's to the nines, okay? And he doesn't do foolish shit. But the Briscoes were great ribbers. So at the time, I was a heel in Florida, and I was there for a short period when Ricky was there. And I don't know if I was between territories. I actually was between territories, and I had a home in Florida, and I came back, and I was working for a few months before I went to San Francisco. So Ricky took a liking to the Briscoes, took a liking to Ricky, and they was driving everywhere with him. And back in those days, a lot of guys, because they didn't want to wait for a plane, they would drive from Tampa to Miami and back. That was 300 miles each way. So there's road stories that are on the way back. This is before MAD. You know, everybody bought a case of beer, 300 miles, and you're drinking and telling stories and, you know, throwing signs up, beer bottles out of the window as you're going 90 miles an hour trying to hit the signs, right? So they tell Ricky they were going to do a rib on the guys in my car. Well, Ricky says, "Oh, monsieur, let me do it. What is it? It sounds wonderful." Because they kind of laid it out. They said, now, the interstate isn't finished all the way yet. You got to go from on 95 up to a place called Yeehaw Junction, and you get on this little road, 60. And the only thing that's on that road is a Stuckey's and a little gas station. Okay? So everybody that got off there pulled into Stuckey's and ate. It was the only place for another 150 miles. It was the halfway point. So the Briscoes tell Ricky, "Get naked, and we'll pull over like we got to go to the bathroom. The guys will pull over, and we'll press the button, and you jump out of the car naked and scare the shit out of them." "Oh, monsieur, that sounds fabulous. Well, we're in on the rip, right? So the Briscoes come down. We're right behind them. They pull in, and they back into Stuckey's. Now, there's probably 100 people in Stuckey's there, right? Truck drivers, you know, waitresses, people. It's halfway point. Maybe not 100, but 50. So they press the button. Ricky jumps out of the car. He lands. Everybody takes off. He's naked in the middle of nowhere. Briscoes drive down the road 5 miles. They wait. They can't see him. So we say, "Hey, you better go back and get him. You don't know whether he could have got arrested." They drove back, and next day I said to them, "What happened?" They said he was hiding in a drainage ditch. They wouldn't get arrested. And, you know, this is before cell phones. You know, it's funny. Yeah.
Sure. Well, great story. Well, again, I was anticipating a good one. Definitely did not disappoint there. So we appreciate you sharing that with us. So getting back, moving along, sort of in your timeline, so to speak, your great career in the business of wrestling. Wanted to real quickly go back before we moved along to a performer you work with, not only in your first WCW run, and then you actually, when you came back there too, that's Cactus Jack McFoley. You know, you win the tag titles with him, actually beat him in a loser leave town match there at Fall Brawl that one year when he was leaving the company. So just wanted to know, what were your initial thoughts on Foley during those early years that you worked with him? You know, did you maybe see some of that star potential that eventually, through all his hard work and obvious passion for wrestling, would be able to come forward in his WWF run? And if you remember, why was he ever let go from WCW?
He and Eric didn't get along for some reason. I don't know why it was. I don't know why, but because he was one of the hardest workers I've ever been. And when he left, got terminated or whatever, he quit, I actually gave him my spot in Japan. And he made much more than of it than I did. You know, he ended up having the legendary matches with Terry and Onita. I saw the potential in this guy. Now, I'm going to say something about Mick that's the left-hander's compliment, but it's a huge compliment, okay? Name me a guy besides Mick Foley that drew that kind of money that wore a shirt full-time.
Good point.
Wow. Good piece.
Can you name anyone?
Not that had that big of a draw. No.
Yeah.
Can you name any guy that drew money?
One-man gang and boss
Can't
man.
think of one.
Boss man, yes, but not to one-man gang because of the length. Yes, the one-man gang drew money, but not the length that Cactus did. Mick did.
Sure.
Mick took the most. He was a student of the wrestling business. We were beating them for a long time, and the night that he went through the cage, I came in and said, we're going to lost in the ratings tonight. Because they showed that back. He single-handedly turned the ratings around. Not single-handedly, but he was a big component of that. I mean, that match him and the Undertaker had was as classic match as you want to, was one of the best, if not the best hardcore match I ever saw in my life, best cage match I ever saw in my life. So Mick not only drew, if you didn't see what he had, you didn't know the wrestling business. I mean, he laid his body on the line every night. I mean, Cactus and I had a match against the Nasty Boys on one of the pay-per-views that Cactus and I looked at each other and said, did anybody smarten these guys up? I mean, they had, if you ever watch it, it was, we had one of the Flyers, the guy that was tough for the Flyers was a special referee. He ended up hitting one of the Nasty Boys with his hockey stick.
Yeah, it was Dave Schultz. Yeah.
Dave Schultz, yeah. I mean, do you remember that match?
Yeah, I certainly do. I think I'm not sure if it was a Halloween Havoc. It was in Philadelphia.
Halloween Havoc. You're absolutely right. It was in Philadelphia. And what's funny about it that night? I came out with a Philly John Kruk shirt on, and I had a Philly hat on, but I put a sparrow under my hat and took it off, but no one got a glimpse of it. It was an old Casey Stengel thing, giving the people the bird in Philly. So, yeah. But, I mean, Cactus was incredible. Every night he did that. I can see a guy doing that once in a while, but every night he was doing it. His passion for the business was unsurpassed. I mean, he went and busted his butt every night. And nice guy, too.
Oh, absolutely. Mick Foley, one of our favorites here at WGD Weekly with Stephen the Scum. We're sitting down with Kevin Sullivan doing a timeline of his career, telling some great stories along the way, so thanks for listening. We got plenty more to come today. Kevin, you move back down to WCW and get into a program with Hulk Hogan as the Taskmaster of the Dungeon of Doom. At the same time, you take over some creative control as being one of the bookers in the backstage area. Now, there was an angle at that time with Brian Pillman. It was kind of a strange angle as a wrestling fan because it didn't seem to resolve itself. He had left WCW, made a pit stop in ECW, kind of like yourself, and then ended up in WWF TV shortly thereafter. So if you could, talk to us about taking over the booking in WCW and what exactly happened with the Brian Pillman angle.
Well, at that time, the creative team, Hogan came to me, and it was in turmoil and said, can you get us there? I said, I can take you to the promised land. Just give it to me. And the Dungeon of Doom was created to relax Hulk. I was going another way. I was going to hardcore. NWO came along later. I was trying to re-educate people into wrestling. But I knew to get Hulk's trust that I'd have to feed him characters that he was used to beating in New York. People always ask me, well, why did you do that? Well, you know how I said earlier, if you don't like the sword swallowers, don't worry, the acrobats are on next. Well, we were Hulk's extension to. I did this on purpose so he would relax. When in my head, I was turned on the heel 2 years prior to this. I knew there was a time. I started seeing people booing him. You know, say prayers, take your vitamins, and cramming it down. Then it started getting worse and worse and worse. So the only thing I could figure out is I got to get this guy's trust to have him switch heel, but it's going to take me a long time. So that's where the Dungeon of Doom was. Now, on the other hand, Brian Pillman, one of the saddest moments of my life was when I heard he passed away, because not only did we lose a great performer, we lost one of the greatest minds in the wrestling business. Brian had an idea. You know, he used to go to the Bengals game on the sidelines. And he told me an idea he wanted to do was, during the football game, as the team moved down the field, he was going to run on the field with chain himself and lock it to the goalpost. Wouldn't that make national news? I mean, the loose cannon. That's how, I mean, on ESPN. Yeah, he was going as a loose cannon then, okay? And one of the biggest compliments I ever got in my life about an angle was, and Brian deserved it as well, was a bunch of guys in the NWO bought that pay-per-view because they wanted to see the shoot between me and Pillman. The funny thing was, Brian came up to me, it was his idea, 100%, okay? And we were starting to have problems in the dressing room, and he wouldn't do what I wanted. And the funny thing was, guys would come up to me and say, I want you to kick the shit out of Pillman for me, will you? Jesus Christ, he's a real pain in the ass. Then 10 minutes later, I see the guy in the corner talking to Pillman, and Pillman and I would call each other, and I'd say, you know, what did he say? He said he wants me to kick the shit out of you. He said the same thing about you, and we'd laugh about it. But Brian, finally, it blew up when Brian, we were doing it at Universal Studios. I'm sorry, we were at Disney at the time, and we had Eric had called a team meeting, everybody there, and then Brian just went off the deep end, started knocking me and Eric told him to leave, and then I booked us in a strap match, and that was the famous thing, book man, I respect you, and broke the pencil, and I broke the pencil and all that. And we were so far away from a wrestling interview, people said this one got to be real, because I believe, as a wrestling fan, you know how I told you way back when we started this interview, I believe the Sheik was real?
Yep. Yes, Eddie Farley.
I believe that all of us want to believe that somebody's real, that some part of this shit is real. Somebody goes off and hits somebody. And Brian was the perfect guy for that mold. And when the match came, the referee was supposed to go out with the strap. Strap was Nick Patrick. I said, where's the strap? He said, Pillman got it. I don't know where he is. And I go down, and me and Pillman get into it, and that was it. But here's the funny thing. Pillman double-crossed everybody. And he called me and told me what he was going to do afterwards, and I thought it was brilliant. And I wasn't going to turn him in. When he went to ECW, he was getting paid by us. Because he was supposed to come back. Do you see what I'm saying? We fired him because he was crazy. That if you ever saw the tape of the match only lasted like 30 seconds. And we fired him, but we didn't. He was still on payroll while he was getting paid by Paul E. And then I've heard this, that he was getting paid by WWE also before he went up there. So he was getting 3 paychecks. Yeah. But he was a brilliant mind and a brilliant worker and drew a lot of money because he was not, at that time, you know, the wrestling business hadn't really got the luchadors yet, and, you know, anybody can wrestle. It was big. It was really kind of, Hulk Hogan-ish. And Brian was 5'8", 210, and I'm being kind at 5'8", you know? So he was a great performer, great mind.
Absolutely. Well, again, as that was kind of around the point in time where, like you were saying, and I think I know Steve would agree with me when I say maybe that's kind of what's missing somewhat in today's product, what you brought up about, people want to have something that they can look at and think like, hey, this is real, And
Steve, I'm going to ask you guys something, and you guys are really hip, okay? Scum, let me ask you this.
Okay.
Did you guys go to a movie when Goldberg was on? Did you fucking half-ass believe it? Did you pop every time he speared somebody? Because I know I did.
Oh, yeah.
Initially, yes. It became more entertaining for me when he would come out bleeding after headbutting the lockers before the match. That's when I really started to like Goldberg.
Yeah, and then there was that chant. I mean, everybody wants to believe that something went wrong, there's a feud, or this guy's real, or this guy's a badass, or, this guy's really tough, or this guy hit the guy and hurt him. And we all want it. We all slow down we go by a car wreck to see the carnage, And that's what I think is missing today.
Sure. I would agree with you 100% on that. And keep moving along, and as the booking kind of was heading in that direction in WCW, and you were still competing, your in-ring career wound down with a great and memorable feud that certainly blurred those lines of reality with Chris Benoit. And then, years following that, WCW, you had the NWO like you spoke of, and different things that just came across as real. Then as, I don't know if you want to say the wheels started coming off as you got to the late 90s and into 2000 and stuff, they had the failed experiment there. They brought in Russo and Ferrara as head writers, and then that didn't work, and you were brought back in as lead booker to try and clean the whole mess up there. Then you had, right when you came on as the booker, you had Benoit and Guerrero and Malenko and Perry Saturn left the company, kind of, four of your better performers that just up and left. So what in your estimation was the deciding factor in all them deciding to jump over to WWF? I mean, was it just too far gone and they saw the writing on the wall after the whole Russo thing didn't work, or?
No, I think it was, might have been personal. Probably was personal. I just made one of them the World Heavyweight Champion, and it was, takes a lot of balls to ask Sid Vicious to lose to a guy 5'6".
Right. Well, I mean, Benoit pretty much immediately became the champion when that switchover went.
Yeah. But they felt that I was going to do something, or they didn't feel comfortable, or they got an offer from Vince, because they went from making probably a base salary of $350 to $400 to $750 to $1 million. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I really believe that it was, that was either me or them, and the company stayed with me. If I was the guy running the company, I don't know if I would have done that.
Right.
But I think it was a personal thing, personal problem, but I didn't take any problem at work personal, because I knew they were the best talent I had. Why would you shit where you eat? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was not the point. I mean, I could leave private. I can dislike somebody quite a bit, and when it's business, I put it aside.
Sure. Now, did you have any interaction with those guys? When I know they're, at least from what I've read, and obviously I was nowhere near that product, but was it, the writing was kind of on the wall that they were planning to leave, and then they weren't going to leave, and they might stay. I mean, did you have any interaction there that maybe would have made you think that they could have been somehow persuaded to stay, or did it just seem like, things...
Well, when you put the belt on one of them, when you put the world belt on one of them, and the next week you're going to put the tag belts on them, I think I gave the olive branch as much as...
Right, yeah. It would seem that way.
Yeah, I think that they had made their minds up that they weren't going to change it no matter what. I mean, Benoit's salary would have increased to $1 million. Their other salary would have increased. But I think that they had made their mind up that they were going. And I think the other thing is, prior to me coming back, they got poisoned by the two other guys. Russo and Ferrara.
Now, did you work at all creatively with those two? What was your recollection of the time they were in charge?
Let me just say, did I work with them? No, I sat there and listened to them. And I was smart enough to understand what they were trying to do. I went to JJ, who had brought them in. I said, do you know what this is going to be, what they're laying out? And he said, what do you mean? I said, they're laying out a cartoon series they're going to try to sell a television show based on wrestling. He said, you're right. Nobody could have been that stupid. And usually I'm more diplomatic than that. I usually say you got like chocolate ice cream and like vanilla ice cream. You guys are wrestling fans. Did that pertain to anything that was close to wrestling? Burying Ric Flair in the desert, that wasn't Freudian. Burying the guy in the desert and leaving him and the young guys taking over, that's not a Freudian slip. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It was, and then at one time they poured the tomato sauce on the Italian guys, and I said to JJ, I said, you're going to get the Italian Defamation League's going to call you. I've dealt with these people before. You know, like they want to make, during the heat of the IRA wars, they want to do something with me. I said, are you kidding me? I live in those neighborhoods. Are you shitting me? I'm not going to do that. And then the next day, the Italian Defamation League called, and I think JJ thought I put the call in. It was so blatant. It was horrible. If you take a look at when they come in, and you tell me now that I've mentioned it, don't you think they were trying to make a show out of that? I remember turning to Arn Anderson one day and saying, I've seen, this isn't even a good, bad independent.
It did get pretty confusing with the
Oh, you take Goldberg and turn him heel for no reason, and then what was it? Then they make the actor the world heavyweight champion, and then Russo becomes the world heavyweight champion, and they knock Dusty about his ego.
Yeah.
Please. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I look at that period and say, wasn't anybody paying attention to the farm? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Huns are in town, they're raping our women, screwing our sheep, and burning the houses down, and we're watching Days of Our Lives? Come on. Is anybody paying attention? And I used to say that. I said, is anybody paying attention to this, or am I just completely...
Right, absolutely. Well, as we're on the subject, it's clear that you spent your whole adult life in the world of professional wrestling. It's something that you've dedicated your whole career to. And then to see a couple of guys come in and try to, for lack of a better term, they reinvent the wheel. I'm sure that's something that, fires you up and gets you very passionate. But let me ask you, while I have you here on the subject, did you ever have a time where you sat down with the two and just tried to voice reason from an experience point of view, or give them your input, or try to salvage some sort of a working relationship?
I try to be diplomatic about it. And then I got on the wrong side of them because JJ, they call a meeting, right? And they have me come in and they say the boss. Now I got to work under this guy, Russo and Ferrara, right? I'm now no longer in the ring, and I'm doing, I guess they call it producing now, right? They bring me in the room when they're knocking this guy, and they say to me, tell him what should be done. What? And Russo and Ferrara, rightfully so, said some words, and they left. And the other two guys looked at me and said, why weren't you harder? I said, you just stabbed me in the back. If you were going to do it, you should have brought me in at the very beginning of this, rather than when the fire is hot, and said, do you have any ideas that could mesh with these guys' ideas? I said, but you hired these guys to run the company. I have no right to knock these guys because that's their position. You hired them. Now, if you wanted me to give them my opinion, it should have been laid out a lot earlier that Kevin's going to come in here. He's got some ideas. He'd like to run them by you, see what you think. It would have been easy that way. It was horrible the way they laid it out. And there was, and on their end, there wasn't JJ. There was somebody else, and they didn't know how to handle the situation. It was like, you know, you're on a boat with a captain, and but the boat, he tells you, is going to be a 40-foot boat. When you get there, it's an 18-foot boat, and when you go out, there's a big hole in it, and the water's pouring in. He said, don't worry, the boat does this all the time. We won't sink. You know, and they try to look the other way. That's what it was like.
You know, it's really great to hear a lot of this stuff from the horse's mouth. Kevin Sullivan joining us here at WGD Weekly. Thanks once again for tuning in, guys. It's been a great interview so far. Thank you, Kevin Sullivan, for joining us. I wanted to ask an additional question to the subject that we're on now. If we simply handed you the blueprint to WCW and gave you the creative control that Russo and Ferrara had, do you think you would have been able to salvage the company, compete with WWE, and maybe even survive and have things not go down the way they did?
No, I couldn't have, because I'll tell you a story. When this goes back to when Crockett sold to Turner, okay? The acquisition guy's name was Blair Underwood. All the wrestlers treated him like, he was the acquisition guy for Turner, buying companies, right? All the guys treated him badly. Most of the guys treated him badly. I treated him very nicely. I said, if there's anything I can do, let me know. He said, I appreciate that. He said, Ted bought my company when I first started. That's how I got this job. He was a young guy. And he said to me, you know, you treated me nice. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. And never saw him again. Fast forward. I'm in the waning days of WCW. He goes, I get a phone call from the secretary. She says, Kevin, there's a Blair Underwood here this year. So I come out, grab him. He says, can we go in the office? I sit down. He said, Kevin, he said, I'll never forget how you treated me. He said, go and get your contract renewed right now. I said, well, I'm going to hold off for a while. He said, go get it renewed. He said, I've talked to the boss already. They're going to renew you. I said, why would I do that? He said, because AOL is going to buy this company and they don't want wrestling. So what do you mean they don't want wrestling? We're doing 4s to 7s. He said, they don't want wrestling. It's beneath them. He said, they'll have a guy in your sandbox by the second week. I said, what do you mean my sandbox? He said, they'll have a guy in your production before it's over with. Lo and behold, this is before Russo came back. 2 weeks later, first of all, my contract's renewed for 3 years. 2 weeks later, there's a guy from AOL saying, well, you can't say that, you can't say that. Then when they made the switch, I still got paid for 3 years, and I went home. No, you could not, even if you were the Vince McMahon, Jr., Sr., Eddie Graham, Terry Funk, Jim Barnett, you couldn't have stopped what was going to happen because AOL did not want wrestling on their network. And it was the worst merger in the history of business. You can look at the stock prices. They fell from like $72 Turner stock to like $15. It was the worst merger in the history of the business, and I don't think PBS has ever recovered.
No, it's a good point. So that conversation that you had before I move on to the next question, I just wanted to be clear on that. The conversation you had, and did you say the gentleman's name was Blair Underwood?
Yeah. Almost like, isn't there a singer, Blair Underwood?
I think Blair Underwood is actually an actor.
Yeah, he's a black guy,
African-American gentleman.
Yeah. He's an actor, yeah.
So the conversation, though, you had was when about did that take place when he was telling you the merger was going to happen?
Right before it happened. He knew.
Okay. Oh, okay.
We had heard,
all right,
heard rumors, but he knew.
Okay. Just wondering, I had never heard that before. Very, very interesting. We appreciate you sharing that with us. So I had one more question here to wrap things up before, and then Steve is going to finish you off with a little feature that he does at the end of the show. And so enough is enough here with the whole demise of WCW stuff. For the last question I wanted to ask, I think we've let our opinion be known. We certainly respect, and everything that you've said has done nothing more than gain more respect for your appreciation for the history and of the business and your work behind the scenes and everything that you've done. Wanted to know if you feel there's any chance for fans like myself, like Steve, for the people who come to our site, Wrestling's Glory Days, do you think that there would ever be the possibility of seeing wrestling return to the product that we grew up on, that that we miss so dearly, that we've kind of touched on here in this interview? And if you do see it as a possibility, say you were handed an opportunity to take the ball or steer the ship in that direction, how do you think it would have to start out, and how would you go about trying to bring that type of product back to prominence, and could it succeed in today's internet age of wrestling?
Can it succeed? I'm not sure, but I think, I got 500 channels here, and I can't find anything to watch. Wrestling, people talk about TNA, right? That it doesn't draw. Well, it does a .09 where the network does a .03, so it's by far 3 times most popular show. And that's not saying yay or nay to their product. Vince does amazing numbers. He just opened up his own network. But you can't eat. Everybody doesn't like steak. Some people like tacos. There's a niche people out there like you guys, and there's a whole generation that are longing for something different. My belief is the only way this could happen, you're going now, Vince is the NFL. The only way this could happen is if a network needed programming and said, hey, let's create a wrestling show. And they sat down and they got people involved in their hierarchy that knew something, or something like a Jimmy Cornette. There's guys out there that know, still Terry Funk knows more about the wrestling business than I'll ever know.
Or a Kevin Sullivan, for that matter.
There's a lot of guys out there that know what the people want, and I'm going to probably go get some heat about this, but if anybody, and I like the MMA, but they're drawing without anybody knowing who they don't have a real star yet. What I'm saying that they don't have anybody that the girl is carrying the ship now, right?
Yeah.
Rosie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They don't have a Hulk Hogan. They don't have a Muhammad Ali. They don't have somebody that you hate. Ali packed the place because he was on an interview with Gorgeous George. He started doing Gorgeous George shtick. There's gotta be, wrestling is nothing but, people try to make it to I hate to use the word, smart marks, but they're very intelligent, but they overthink this. This isn't Sir Laurence Olivier doing Hamlet. This is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Okay? But if you get something in that Holy Grail and you're watching that program and someone stabs, like when the Black Knight gets his arms chopped off, you go, oh shit! They gotta have something like you, right?
I was
come back, you bastard! Come back, you bastard! It's just a flesh wound. I'll bite your legs off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They threw that in to shock the shit out of you, but it's funny. But if you threw something in like that and brought it up tempo and brought back characters that nobody looks exactly like the same person, the same guy comes out. I often think about this, and I'm putting myself over. But if I was in a ring as a heel, and the babyface came in the ring and turned his back to me and jumped up on the second rope and threw his arms up, I'd be all over. And the other thing is, these guys that wear jewelry, come on, there's something stupid about that. But is there a chance? The only chance it could be if the network said, okay, we're going to start a wrestling company and we're going to try to compete and blah, 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 find somebody and blah, blah, blah. But other than that, they're going to have to market it right. I don't know. And here's my analogy about this. You guys are huge baseball fans. suppose we do away with the I'll start with the Red Sox because I know them better. We get rid of the Red Sox. We get rid of the Pawtucket Red Sox. We get rid of the Portland Red Sox. And we now have the Salem Red Sox. Salem, Virginia Red Sox, okay? Single A ball. A generation goes by. That's all they see. You guys and I would be talking about this is Derek Jeter Jr. You see that Derek Jeter Jr.? Yeah, he's great, isn't he? Yeah, he only made 32 errors in 42 games. He's great.
Right.
You grow up with poor quality, you don't have anything to compare it to.
True.
So you guys know about it, but that's what's going to keep the wrestling business that I do have final hopes for it that will rise from the ashes, because the Internet is going to keep the wrestling alive forever. And someone's going to come in one day. It may not be 5 years. It may not be 10 years. It may not be 1 year. But someone's going to come in one day and look at it, and he's going to go to his boss and say, hey, I got a great idea that owns a network, and they're going to do it.
Yeah. Now, do you think, before we Steve wraps you up here, do you think on a small level, looking back to something that Cornette did with Smoky Mountain, do you think that something like that could see, not necessarily to compete, but just to bring in revenue? And
yes, I think that there's enough people out there that if there's enough great talent. I mean, I've seen some guys on the independent. I saw an independent match 6 months ago that was incredible, and I've seen a lot of them. They're incredible, but these guys get lost in the shuffle. You know, they're older than what they look like they were recruiting. But if you could get what Jimmy had in mind and bring him mind in like Jimmy, yeah, you could make him a little bit of profit, but it'd be a great way for somebody to maybe be seen and create a buzz that a network would pick him up. Yeah, I think that you could have a Jimmy Cornette, and I hope Jimmy starts one again, because he really is a passionate guy, and that's what this wrestling business needs, someone with passion.
Very good.
Oh, man, that is great. Now, I wanted to ask you a really quick question, Kevin, while we're going to keep moving on here, but you mentioned earlier Russo and Ferrara maybe having plans to develop some sort of a television program. I wanted to get into that a little bit more deeply, not so much related to them, but I wanted to get your opinion on what you thought the success rate would be if, let's say, a channel or a cable station like HBO or Showtime decided that they wanted to get into that type of a drama game and maybe write an hour-long TV program. Now, I think the success of the show would be based on what type of acting you'd have in it, whether or not you had actual wrestlers. But the right mix, I think, would be really, really compelling television. I just wanted to get your opinion on whether or not that you think that would succeed.
Well, before I answer this, I want not to get you guys into any trouble. I'm not politically correct, okay? So I want everybody to listen to this. Okay. Who would have thought that a show about a Guinea gangster who went to a psychiatrist would be the hottest series of all times? Yes, I do think it would work. I happen to Chase, David Chase, the guy that wrote it, his father-in-law used to come to my gym. So when he told me the story about it, when David went to pitch this, they looked at him like he had three heads. Your idea? It's brilliant. Of course. I mean, I said we got 500 channels out here, right? I end up ordering something from Netflix if I want to watch something.
Right. Me too.
Yeah, it will work, absolutely. And you're right. It'd be great if the guys look like wrestlers and a little bit, but it's not going to be a wrestling show. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Oh, man, that is great to know. I know myself and the Scum have talked about that many, many times. It's really interesting. I'd love to see some sort of a Sunday night drama about pro wrestling. I think that'd be really cool.
How long have you guys thought about this show?
Oh, we thought of this probably about a year ago. Our show's inception came about May last year, so I guess we've been thinking about it, off and on for about a year.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it could. Absolutely.
Yeah, I always thought that would be really compelling television. Well, Kevin, we're down to name association. All you folks out there in Scum Nation, you know this has been one hell of a show, maybe one of our best interviews to date. Thanks so much to Kevin Sullivan for joining us. Like I said, we're down to name associations, a fun part of the show, right at the very end of our interview every week. We usually ask about the same couple of guys just to get everybody warmed up, and today's no different. Let's take a walk down memory lane and hear a great story about Andre the Giant.
Andre the Giant was a dear friend of mine, okay? Andre just took a liking to me. In fact, the only wrestling memorabilia that I have in my house is a picture of Andre picking me and my brother up, like two little kids. Andre went to my nephew's class when they were in the 6th grade for show and tell. Andre was the most unique human being I ever saw, and he had a heart of gold, but I got to work with him, and he would sell for me. He was an incredible guy. He was a super guy, and he was, hey, I actually believe that if he wasn't there, Hogan never would have got over like he did.
Interesting
sure.
stuff. He certainly had a huge hand in the in the build-up of Hulk Hogan be a household name.
Yeah. And you remember when he ripped the cross off his chest?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. I mean, they did some subliminal stuff. It was really good. And Hogan was bleeding. I mean, it was the monster in the night, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
The White Knight against the Ogre. It was great.
Oh, what a terrific analogy. The White Knight and the Ogre. That's awesome. Well, let's move on to our next guy here. Like we said, he's another regular on our show. We always love to hear a good story about Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch.
Dick Murdoch was one of the greatest talents there was ever in this business. Dickie was up for get the World Heavyweight Championships on a numerous times, but Dickie would go from being Dick Murdoch, the Texas Outlaw, to Curly of the Three Stooges. You didn't know which Dick Murdoch was going to show up. You know what I mean? I don't know if you ever saw him where it goes around a circle on the mat like Curly. But Dick Murdoch was a great guy. I really enjoyed Dickie.
Oh, yeah, that's straight-up entertainment. I always loved Dick Murdoch's story. And, yeah, I absolutely remember him taking those bumps and getting on his side and essentially running around in circles on his side on the mat. Entertaining stuff. But let's talk about a guy you had a really good relationship early on with, Paul Heyman.
Paul Heyman? I started Paul. Paul came to me, wanted to be a manager. And he had a man, brought down a kid. His name was Tombstone. I booked him against Scott Hall, and I told Scott to drill Paul Heyman every night when he jumped up on the apron to see if he'd last. Paul got his bell rung for a month. He lasted. I knew he was going to be a huge, huge influence in this business, and he has been. He's been successful in everything he's done. One of the greatest managers of all times. He had ECW. And I think he's fabulous.
And he's still at it today as one of the most popular guys currently in the WWE. Another guy that's done really well lately in WWE. Some of the new fans may know him as Zeb Coulter. We know him as Dutch Mantell. So let's hear a little bit about old Dutch.
Dutch and I were actually roommates when I first started wrestling back in 1970. And we worked in South Carolina and West Virginia. There's a little territory there. Dutch is one of the great wrestling minds. Never fully appreciated the way he should have been. And Dutch drew money and had a great mind.
And just like Paul Heyman, he's still drawing money today as well. So let's talk about two guys here. I'm going to give you a double shot, Kevin, because they kind of have a similar background as far as their savagery in the ring, as I always like to say on this show. Simple savagery gets you far, and you as well. Let's talk about Mark Lewin, the Purple Haze, and Abdullah the Butcher.
The four best heels, in my opinion, I have to put five. It's the Sheik, Mark Lewin, Terry Funk, Abdullah the Butcher, and Bruiser Brody. I mean, they scared the crap out of people. And I got to work with every one of them. In fact, I'll give you a strange thing. You mentioned Dickie Murdoch. When they were doing the bash at the beach, Great American Bash Tour, I talked Dusty into booking the Sheik. Him and the Sheik against me and Murdoch in a cage in Cobo Hall. It was the biggest. They said, "Oh, won't try. He's too old. He's been off of TV." It was the biggest house they drew on the tour. And it was the only time that I ever saw in a tag match where Murdoch and I turned on each other, Sheik and Dusty turned on each other, and the match ended up being me and the Sheik against Dusty and Murdoch.
That's great.
Yeah, his psychology, people don't understand how much he was. Mark looked like, a monster. His eyes rolled up his head. He's, huge, jacked. Then you look at Abdullah, you don't want to sit across the table from him because you're not going to get much, you know what I mean? And that isn't just about eating. That's in the ring. You had to fight Abdullah to get what you wanted. And then, Terry Funk. I don't have to talk about Terry Funk. You just mentioned the name Terry Funk, and to this day, he's still drawing money. And then Bruiser Brody, who was way ahead of his time.
It's great that you mentioned Bruiser Brody, one of my favorites of all time. As a matter of fact, I named my dog after him.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah, I've been trying to teach a Scream Huss, but I haven't had any luck doing that yet so far. But either way, Bruiser Brody, one of the greatest of all time in my opinion.
I got a chance to work with Brody as me as the baby face, and then later in my career as him as a baby face and me as a heel. So I know Bruiser was fabulous. And I'll tell you something about Brody that he did that I hadn't seen a heel do his size ever and his style ever. Brody, once in a while, if you go back and watch the tapes, would throw a drop kick.
Sure. Yeah.
That kind of hardcore stuff, most people don't throw a drop kick. He was smart enough that he would put different things in and made it his style. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Now, while I had you here, we were talking about Bruiser Brody and being down in Florida. I think at the same time, were you there for that cage match between Lex Luger and Bruiser Brody that everybody talks about? We had talked to Lex about it.
Yeah, it was the debut and the final act at the same time. And I don't know what Lex said, but here's the funny thing. Brody wasn't shooting on him. That's how Brody worked. You know what I mean? Brody was just balls to the wall, and if you didn't fight back, you were going to get eat up. And the thing was, Luger got booked in that match way too soon. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't prepared for a hurricane.
Yeah.
Actually,
what Luger said is, he was so new and so green that he said he really, looking back, he said he shouldn't even have been in that spot. It's pretty much the gist of what he said about it when we spoke with him.
Yeah, and he was right, too. It wasn't his fault. Hiro Matsuda trained him, and he threw him in there. And, I think here's the thing, too. That there's always an underlying current that people don't know of, right? Hiro was a Noki's guy. Now, he owns the territory Eddie Grant had passed on. He owns running the territory. Okay? Brody was working for Baba. He wasn't going to look bad. He didn't know if there was a camera in the audience, you know what I'm saying? So Brody made a good living in Japan. So Hiro put Luger out there thinking that he could, like I said, defend himself against a hurricane. He couldn't.
No, he was certainly wide open in admitting that. I believe the term he actually used was he said, honestly, the guy scared the bejeebus out of me, as I believe what he said. So he had no problem sharing that. He actually kind of chuckled at the end, said what a great guy he thought Brody was and what a great talent. But yeah, when he talked about it, he said pretty much the same thing. But Kevin, if you didn't mind, do you have time for one more question with us?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Well, we had spoken throughout the interview and, about your time being a booker. And I just wanted to, for maybe some of the listeners that aren't really too, I know that term is used a lot. A lot of people, all of that seems like a lot of terms that I guess people say are inside terms get overused, by people that aren't really involved. But could you explain for our listeners exactly what a booker is, like what that position entails, or how one is made, how one becomes one?
Yeah, usually it's made by sitting at the feet of somebody that, some great mind, hopefully, and that you pay attention and watch successful people in the ring and out of the ring, the guys writing the stories, and you understand that you can't go week to week. I was shown how you go a year out, and of course it's going to change, but I always booked a year out, tried to, for the pay-per-views anyway, and then down. And the shows, if I knew where I'm going at the end of the story, I should be able to figure, it's like writing a book, a beginning, a middle, and an end. But it never ends because when you blow it off, there's a sequel. So you are given the opportunity to write, produce, and direct. And that's what a booker really does.
Very good, very good. Well, just want, just for maybe if some of the listeners that do hear that term maybe don't know, in today's day and age of full-on writing teams and TV writers and everything else, I think sometimes maybe that can be confusing to people, the term booker. But we want to thank you, Kevin, for coming on the show with us here and spending your evening with us. It's been fantastic, a thrill and an honor for a couple of your fans over the years, myself and Steve. We can't thank you enough for coming on. I wanted to add in there, you listed the Sheik and the Purple Haze, Brody, Funk, Abdullah as the 5 top heels. I think a lot of people would put Kevin Sullivan on that list as well, my friend. So we can't thank you enough for coming on and spending the time you have with WGD Weekly. We'd love to have you back anytime, and I'm not sure if Steve had anything else to add, but just, again, thank you very much for spending this time with us.
Steve, Scum, thank you. It was really a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks again, Kevin. Here's to the Red Sox coming in second place this year.
Yeah, let's see. Damn Yankees. Let's see how you do without Mo this year. Hey, we get enough class. They said the Red Sox fans had enough class to give them a standing ovation. That's bullshit. They gave a standing ovation because, thank God, we don't have to see him anymore.
That's right. Well, hopefully Ellsbury can stay healthy for us.
Yeah, let's see that. I really like him, but that kid could be a superstar. He could have a year. You remember he hit 31 home runs? That porch there, he could have a year like that, hit 41.
Sure.
Who knows? And he steals 50 bases. Yes, he could steal 50 bases a year, hit 30 home runs. He may be, if he stays healthy, he may be a superstar for you guys.
Well, hope so. They're paying him like one.
Yeah, I know. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. You have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Yo, monkeys, it's me. It's DGT, the king of bada bing, the master diamond killer, the three-time world champion. And you monkeys, you're listening to WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum.
All right, we are back, Scum. I'm not going to lie to you, dude. That was the best interview we've ever done.
Well, it seems like we say that an awful lot, but the hits just keep coming here, Steve. Like I've been saying since day one, way back with Precious Paul Ellering and Scott Hudson and our old pal Buff the Stuff Bagwell. It's been one iron dunked into the fire and resting at the double cross across the WGD Nation's chest since we've started, but I'd have to agree with you here. Kevin Sullivan, what a great interview there. Some of that stuff to hear, I mean, unbelievable. People forget about those old days when even before we touched on that great heel gimmick in Florida, back when he was working. Very interesting to hear his take on the booking side that he credits somewhat to his early days working under Vince McMahon Sr. Pretty cool stuff.
Oh, yeah. And having having been around to be able to go and actually see those matches, Koloff, Sammartino from the Garden, that's pretty special stuff. And there's so many things out of that interview that I just found thoroughly entertaining. But I thought that he was talking about going on tour with old NWA. Dusty was the booker, and it was he and Dick Murdoch versus the Sheik and Dusty Rhodes, and the double cross in the match where it ended up being Murdoch and Rhodes versus Sullivan and the Sheik. That must have been a sadistic match to watch. Everybody was bleeding in that match.
The old switcheroo. You got to love that. It's happened a few times over the years. More recently, if people always point to the great theater that was that WrestleMania 13, Austin and Brett, where the crowd, they kind of swap places there. But not many times I remember actual tag team partners swapping places in the middle of a match and it working. It speaks to the talent of those gentlemen involved. I guess gentlemen you would have to use loosely when you're talking Rhodes and Murdoch, who have been known to share a 3-bedroom with a mule, and the original Sheik and Kevin Sullivan, who neither was a stranger to a large, sharpened Sindlicker piece of metal.
I thought it was great too that he was like, everybody talks about the deal with Luger and Brody in the cage. He's like, but I'll be quite honest with you, Brody wasn't shooting on him. That was just how he worked, and Luger didn't have the experience to know how to deal with him. So there you go. Wrestling lore kind of brought back down to the basics. There's always a true story behind the legend, they say, and I think that was it tonight with Kevin Sullivan.
Absolutely. Well, if you remember when Lex was on the program with us, I think he said, I got out of there and I ran as fast as I could with my tail between my legs, because to be honest with you, that guy scared the bejeebus out of me.
Yeah.
But before we move on, though, one thing I thought was really cool with Sullivan on the creative side is when we talked about the Dungeon of Doom and when Hogan had first come to WCW and how, he wanted to make Hogan feel comfortable, because, he was feeding them the monsters like the WWF days when he had the Bundys and the Kamalas and the Andres and Big John Studd and Earthquake and on with the Boss Man and all the guys that Hogan feuded with. So they created that Dungeon of Doom of monsters to feed them. But what Sullivan said is his thinking on that was that even way back then, 94, 95, he knew with the Southern crowd and with the fact that, Hogan was almost the enemy all those years to the, the classic wrestling versus the entertaining, the rock and wrestling connection deal. Flair was their guy down there. Flair was their champion. So Sullivan kind of knew that he wanted to get Hogan's trust so he could trust him when he was leading him down the road to turn heel, even back then. Pretty interesting stuff. Pretty smart guy.
Oh, yeah. He can see the trend coming in wrestling, I think, before a lot of people. And he is absolutely right. If you noticed, and we always use WrestleCade as our kind of our home base. It was our first venture out into the world of professional wrestling with Steve and the Scum together. We've obviously been to many shows up and down the roads together, but to go to a event like this as a, podcast show and be able to do some of the things we do is really unique. So we talk about it a lot, but when we were there were some times where they were talking about, old WWF trivia and whatnot. And every time Hulk Hogan's name came up, that place booed. And you got to figure that, looking back at the fan base, that the fan base that was drawn in during the, Monday Night Wars era, those fans still now are maybe in their late 20s, early 30s. So you're talking about a fan base of, more our age up into the late 30s, early 40s and beyond. They wanted nothing to do with Hulk Hogan. The younger people obviously can kind of, appreciate it a little bit from a different perspective. They probably may not even know Hogan anything more than being a legend and working at TNA. But when you go and talk to some of the older guys that were there that were die-hard fans of Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, they wanted nothing to do with Hulk Hogan, and that whole weekend was focused on Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, and quite frankly, if anybody worked anywhere else, they really didn't give a shit.
Sure. And I think that plays into it somewhat, being that it was, in the heart of the Carolinas. I also think that plays in a lot of, as far as, that would be my take on the older crowd that was there. giving the boo, like I just said, you could see the writing on the wall, and Hogan was the enemy from up north, and Flair was the guy down south that was carrying the strap. But I think a lot of that plays into too with that it's kind of unfortunately become somewhat passé to boo Hulk Hogan. I think a lot of the people that are younger that boo him probably weren't even alive, and if they were, definitely weren't like tuning in like to the classic Hulkamania era, and more know him as the guy who would quote unquote play his creative card behind the scenes, because all of them have spent so much time in that WCW locker room.
Right. Well, is it safe to say, let me ask you, Scum, is this safe to say that there is now what's called Hulk Hogan syndrome? And that is, if you are good at what you do and you get the kids, which is most important in the marketing for the major promotions today, is to sell merchandise. Is it safe to say that anybody that can do that is now hated by the internet wrestling community because they're popular? So the anti-conformity, what's going to happen is wrestling fans nowadays, they cheer someone until they're popular and then they boo them because now they're popular.
Right.
So, every guy up and coming now that's being cheered, once they get over with the crowd and they're huge, be prepared to get booed, because apparently that's Hulk Hogan syndrome.
Yeah. I think it would be fair to call it that, but I don't even think in the case of Hulk Hogan that most of those people even realize that he was cheered like that. I mean, because anyone who will go on a limb and say that so-and-so was getting, take a listen to some of the pops that Hulk Hogan used to get for that 6-7 year run before the yellow and red, technically, I guess you would say, got a little bit stale. But as far as you're speaking, you look at, look at when John Cena made his return that year to the Rumble, not too distant, and the place went bonkers. And now you got the Cena sucks and this or that. So yeah, yes, I would agree with you, Steve. There's the Hulk Hogan syndrome where they'll cheer the hell out of them, and then all of a sudden it's not cool to cheer them anymore. Look at just recently, Batista came back and popped the biggest rating that they've had on Raw in years, and then 2 days later,
now he's getting booed out of the building.
2 days later, because Daniel Bryan wasn't in the Royal Rumble, everybody hates the guy. It was huge when they announced that he was coming back. People were psyched. That's all they talked about. Nice, the Animal's coming back. 2 days later, they dropped their collective pants and took a dump on the guy.
Yeah, totally. And, I didn't really watch wrestling very closely when he made his debut. That was, what was 04, 05, somewhere in there. I had just gotten married. I had a very busy job, and I didn't watch wrestling a lot. And be quite frank with you, I was interested to see him come back because I was like, well, now I'm kind of invested, and I do watch it on somewhat of a regular basis. But I'll be quite frank with you, I don't see what the fucking big deal is with the guy.
Yeah,
another big muscular guy.
Okay, Batista wasn't necessarily my era. What I did see of him, I always enjoyed his work. I thought he was your classic big man, power bomb, big boot, a monster, and
that's the thing.
I was happy to see him come back, and just because Daniel Bryan wasn't in the Rumble there again, I don't think he's necessarily 2 hours and 45 minutes till the curfew comes up between Strangler Lewis and Frank Gotch or anything, but he's certainly your classic big man, and I'm happy to have him back. I'd rather have Batista out there, for a few years pounding than some of the guys that I have absolutely zero interest in. So, maybe they rushed him a little bit into the WrestleMania main event, but I think when it popped that number, whether they were undecided on what they wanted to do with them or not, I think that was probably pushed it over the top to where they made their decision. And again, like you said, he's not necessarily my favorite guy of all time or anything, but hey, I'll take him on every Monday night. He certainly adds to the program more than he takes away, or more than, sending like 3 MB out there to get squashed.
Well, he added to the perfect bathroom break on Raw last week because Del Rio came out as well. So I figured I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone and drop a 2 while he was out there, and the timing worked out really well. Either way, we're going to move on from there.
Now by a two, do you mean you went in the other room and scored with a high knee lift?
No, I dropped a bunch of little 2s, and each one of them had little white masks on floating around in the toilet.
You might want to have that one checked out.
I actually had that implanted. What are you talking about?
Well, twos, just
I paid extra for that.
now, as long as they each were individually chanting two, we're all good.
Yeah, that's right, man. Bunch of Mr. Hankies in there yelling two.
Now you start dropping off some TAs and we got problems.
Or some Bundys.
That's right.
All right, man. Well, hey, we were talking about a little bit. I wanted to play this for everybody, Scum. Prior to our interview with Kevin Sullivan, I had a little bit of technical difficulty. I don't know what the hell happened. My internet just died for like 3 minutes for no real apparent reason. So I still to this day don't know why that happened. I got a brand new computer and it's never happened since. But either way, it opened up the door for us to have a little bit of small talk with Kevin Sullivan about our favorite sport, and that's baseball.
Yep.
And he is a huge baseball fan, a huge Boston Red Sox fan. So, as you'll find out, you got a couple of New York Yankee diehards talking with a Red Sox diehard. Always interesting dialogue there. So we're going to play that for you in full. And I'm not going to do the audio tracks over it. It's just going to be the raw take phone call. So enjoy that. Kevin Sullivan, and like Scum, like you were saying, man, he's a great mind in general. He's a cerebral guy. And he was, he played a real sadistic madman when he was on TV. And that was certainly believable because he was smart and he knew how to play up to the crowd. And as you heard in the interview, he didn't start you at S. He started you at A. And by the time he got to S, you were fully emotionally invested. So being that cerebral about things, you end up being a baseball fan because it's a very smart game. It takes a lot of thinking above and beyond athletic ability. So to have that type of conversation with Kevin Sullivan was really cool. So we're going to play that for you at the end of our show in full, and we hope that you enjoy it.
Absolutely. I know I enjoyed it. I mean, it was, like you said, there was a little technical snafu, but when we had first met him down in Winston-Salem, he was rocking the Red Sox jersey. He's a Boston guy, so a natural conversation being that we're both baseball fans. And again, a lot of people would think like, oh boy, they're slugging it out if it's Yankees and Red Sox fans. Well, personally, I'm a huge fan of all baseball and can respect anything, and even including the Red Sox run to the title this year as a Yankees fan. And you can immediately tell, like you're going to see here in a minute, that he's a man who not only with some of the names he drops and some of the statistics he drops, he's not only a man who has a great wrestling mind, but also a very good, knowledgeable sports mind, obviously, because I would imagine if he's talking baseball, I would imagine he probably knows his stuff on almost anything that he sets his eyes on. So, yeah, very interesting stuff. And it being, like you said, a couple of Yankee fans and the novelty of talking Mariano and talking Big Papi on his side and, Jeter and some of the stuff that we got into. Definitely a good listen, so hope you all enjoy that. Steven the Scum taking the field, so to speak, with Kevin Sullivan coming right at you.
Yeah, we're going to play some pepper with Kevin Sullivan. But who do we got next week, Scum? Who's around the corner, man?
Well, next week, Steve, we keep in our theme of classic NWA performers. We've had Ronnie Garvin. We've had Tully Blanchard. Now we've had the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan. And next week, an old buddy of ours, once again, that we met down in Winston-Salem, we got former two-time World Tag Team Champion, the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez.
Oh, yeah, I can't wait for that, man. Chill that Jaeger, get it ice cold, sit back, pour a glass, and listen to the Raging Bull go off on so many different subjects. I told you guys, was it last week, the week before, we already had that thing in the tank, and it is a great interview. You do not want to miss it. This one here with Kevin Sullivan was one for the ages, though, man. It was great. We'll see you guys next week with Manny Fernandez, the Raging Bull. Scum, anything you want to add before we head out?
Nope, just trying to flag down this vendor over here and grab a couple of dogs and a bag of Cracker Jacks here to listen to the end of this program. I hope everybody has a good week, and we'll see you next week with the Raging Bull.
It's very hard to repeat. And they really were last year, I think, a team of destiny, huh?
Yeah.
After that Boston bombing, it was like it's sometimes, you look at things and you say, this is like a B movie, you know what I mean? And they're a team of destiny. Ortiz was out of his mind, you know what I mean? Yeah. You put that home run that he took away from him, Beltran took away from him, and he would have, hit over 700. He hit 680 something. I mean, it was the second highest batting average of all time in the World Series, where the rest of the team hit like 151, and he carried them on his back. And that, what's amazing is I followed them when they were since I've been very young, and they were horrible. In 2004, they broke the curse, and it was like, woof. And then 2007 was like, But this was special, I think, because of the bombing. And, and I think that we saw Ortiz, now that Frank Thomas got in, it looked like Inigo Martinez, I believe, should be in. And I think it will break that stigma of designated hitters. And I think my personal belief is I've seen a lot of players in my lifetime, but I don't think I've ever seen anybody as clutch as Ortiz. I mean, they don't get the...
You got a couple of Yankee fans here, and he certainly broke our heart 1,000,000 times over the years.
Oh,
so.
man,
I don't want to hear you two whining about
no whining.
I'm breaking hearts. There's a whole bunch of people that either jumped off bridges, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2003. Full page route, please. I'm begging you. And then the other thing is, I'm sure you guys will agree with me, the guy that saved that game, the last game in 2003, was a guy that was overlooked for the Hall of Fame, Mike Mussina. Without him, the Red Sox win 2003 too.
Oh, absolutely. He came in after Clemens flopped that game. He came in with nobody out and got all those guys. Yeah.
Guys are first and third and nobody out. Yeah.
He retired a 20-game winner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He won 20 games last year.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the only time he won 20 was his last year.
Absolutely. Well, he had won 18 and 19. He never got 20, and then he does and retires.
Yeah. But you remember the reason why he wasn't a 20-game winner when he won 18 and 19? The strike and then the work stoppage.
Yeah.
True.
So he would have been a 20-game winner, more than likely, unless something really was wrong.
Yeah.
And if you look at his winning percentage, is next to Jim Palmer. I'm not saying he's Jim Palmer, but they get the exact winning percentage. He should have got more votes than he did. I thought the voting myself was horrible.
To be honest with you, I think Mussina might have won more ball games than Palmer in his career.
Really?
Yeah, Mussina, when he retired with that 20-game winner, I think he finished around 278, 280. I'm pretty sure Palmer won somewhere around 250.
Yeah, you're right. I think it was like 276 he won. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't get it. I mean, and Palmer definitely played with some good clubs, too. I mean, it wasn't like he was playing in a bad era or anything. So
those were great teams.
Yeah, I mean, they had 4 20-game winners one year. You remember that?
Yeah.
So they were powerful teams, and he played for powerful clubs. So, and Mike Mussina pitched the American League East this whole time during the designated hitter rule. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and during definitely back to what you were saying with Ortiz, you're getting on with respect out of me for that guy. I've seen what he can do. I mean, I know this year he was out of his mind, and he's a little bit older now, but that year, 2004, when they finally got it done and came back with that great comeback against the Yanks, I mean, every time that guy walked up to the plate, I was just thinking, God, throw around him. I don't care if the bases are loaded. I mean, do something. But every time he swung the bat, something bad happened. Well, good for you, I suppose.
I'm going to tell you guys a real quick story. Is that week, October 16th, 2004, Yankees 18, Red Sox, I think 3 or 6. Matsui went off. Everything. It was just a blowout game. That night was my bachelor party. Okay, so I wake up in a daze like the next day, and so I think Monday comes around, and I find out what's going on in the game because I wasn't keeping track just because it was a wild weekend. So I get married a week later. That Monday night, Johnny Damon, Grand Slam. I think they won 10-2. It was a blowout that last game. And right then, I should have known my marriage was going to fail.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. And I'm sure a lot of the people, but I know, just you always felt like, you know, somehow in the end you're going to win. It was just stunning, that comeback.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I'm all fixed up, by the way, guys, just to let you know.
Okay. Yeah, the comeback was, and for us, the Red Sox fans, we were expecting the collapse in that seventh game. When Damon hit that grand slam in the first inning, or second inning, whatever it was,
yeah,
people in Boston still weren't secure until the final out.
No, I'm sure. Yeah.
So great stuff there. And, you know, I think maybe myself and the Scum could have an argument that the clutch hitting of David Ortiz, there's a certain guy that wears number 2 on our team that may be considered just as clutch.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, come on. When you guys played in the World Series against the Diamondbacks, I mean, and, hey, one of the greatest plays of all time is Giambi, that scoop throw. Come on.
Yeah.
Against the A's, that was unbelievable.
That scoop throw, he wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah.
And the guy overthrew 2 cutoff men, but he's there and scoops it backhanded like you're a kid and throwing the ball to your dog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Perfect. And Posada doesn't have to leave his position. It's right in his glove, and it hits Giambi's leg that's up before it hits the plate.
Yeah. That was just unbelievable instincts to be there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Definitely.
They show a replay of that play from a broad distance. We all know the classic camera angle from the third base side where you can see the play develop. But
right.
they actually, there's footage of a high camera like up in the press box behind home plate, and to see where he came from was he came from like shallow left to make that play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always liked right whoever they played following that when they won that game, because they were down 2-0 to Oakland, and that was the third game. Actually, that was Mussina too, pitched his ass off and kept us in it that time. Yeah. But they came back and won those 3 games. Whoever they opened with when they went back to the stadium, I remember they had Yogi and Rizzuto throughout the first pitch, and Rizzuto faked the throw, being the classic shortstop, faked the throw from the mound and ran in and flipped it to Posada.
That's great.
Yeah.